to study number 18 in Search the Scriptures. We are on the last chapter of 2 Samuel chapter number 24. And we are going to attempt to answer 3 questions in this study today. The first is compare the length of time taken by Joab to count and the time the angel took to slay the Israelites. And B, compare the atonement required by God for David's adultery with that is exacted here in 2 Samuel 24. And what sin of David's part is being dealt with here. What 2 lessons are taught about it. Secondly, where was Araunah's threshing floor? What outstanding event had happened there previously, Genesis 22? And what was the site eventually used for? And then finally, is there a lesson for us in David's declaration of verse number 24? Verse 24 of this chapter, he says, I will not make a sacrifice that requires nothing of me, or that costs me nothing. So let's look at 2 Samuel chapter number 24 together, beginning with the very first verse. Again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, Go and take a census of Israel and Judah. So the king said to Joab and the army commanders with him, Go throughout the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and enroll the fighting men, so that I may know how many there are. But Joab replied to the king, May the Lord your God multiply the troops 100 times over, and may the eyes of my lord the king see it. But why does my lord the king want to do such a thing? The king's word, however, overruled Joab and the army commanders, so they left the presence of the king to enroll the fighting men of Israel. After crossing the Jordan, they camped near Aroer, south of the town in the gorge, and then went through Gad and onto Jazer, where then they went to Gilead in the region of Tatim Hadshi, and onto Dan Jaan, and around the town toward Sidon. And there they went toward the fortress of Tyre and all the towns of the Hivites and the Canaanites, and finally they went on to Beersheba in the Negev of Judah. After they had gone through the entire land, they came back to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. Joab reported the number of fighting men to the king. In Israel there were 800,000 able-bodied men who could handle a sword, and in Judah 500,000. David was conscience-stricken after he had counted the fighting men, and he said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. Now, Lord, I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I've done a very foolish thing. Before David got up the next morning, the word of the Lord had come to Gad the prophet, David's seer. Go and tell David, this is what the Lord says. I'm giving you 3 options. Choose one of them to carry out against you. So Gad went to David and said to him, Shall there come on you 3 years of famine in your land, or 3 months of fleeing from your enemies while they pursue you, or 3 days of plague in your land? Now then, think it over and decide how I should answer the one who sent me. David said to Gad, I am in deep distress. Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but do not let me fall into human hands. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel from that morning until the end of the time designated, and 70,000 of the people from Dan to Beersheba died. When the angel stretched out his hand to destroy Jerusalem, the Lord relented concerning the disaster, and said to the angel who was afflicting the people, Enough, withdraw your hand. And the angel of the Lord was then at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. And when David saw the angel who was striking down the people, he said to the Lord, I've sinned. I, the shepherd, have done wrong. These are but sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall on me and my family. And on that day Gad went to David and said to him, Go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David went up as the Lord had commanded through Gad. And when Araunah looked and saw the king and his officials coming toward him, he went out and he bowed down before the king with his face to the ground. And Araunah said, Why has my lord the king come to his servant? To buy your threshing floor, David answered, so I can build an altar to the Lord, that the plague of the people may be stopped. And Araunah said to David, Let my lord the king take whatever he wishes and offer it up. Here are oxen for the burnt offering, and here are threshing sledges and ox yokes for the wood. Your majesty, Araunah, gives all this to the king. Araunah also said to him, May the Lord your God accept you. But the king replied to Araunah, No, I insist on paying you for it. I'll not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen, paid 50 shekels of silver for them, and David built an altar to the Lord there and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. And then the Lord answered his prayer in behalf of the land, and the plague on Israel was stopped. Question number 1 for study 18, compare the length of time taken by Joab to count and by the angel to slay the Israelites. And B, compare the atonement required by God for David's adultery with that exacted here in this chapter. And finally, what sin of David's part is being dealt with and what 2 lessons are taught about it. Well, it took Joab 9 months and 20 days to count the number of fighting men throughout Israel, yet it only took God 3 days to destroy 70,000 people with the plague. The sin with Bathsheba took the death of one child, the firstborn of David and Bathsheba, but the sin of David here goes beyond that of an individual. God's anger, as is stated in the very opening verse, chapter 1 of verse 24, his anger is directed against Israel, the nation of Israel. Because he's angry at the nation, he allows David to do this to kind of give reason for his anger. There's a problem here of a national pride. The nation, not just David, had become dependent upon the size of their army rather than upon the power of their God. They'd begun to run to the military for their help rather than to the Lord. So God uses this act to teach personal and national humility as well as dependence upon him. Secondly, where was Araunah's threshing floor? What outstanding event had happened there previously, and what was the site eventually used for? Well, Araunah's threshing floor was on Mount Moriah. It was the site where Abraham was asked to sacrifice Isaac and where the plague against Israel had stopped. It became the future site of the temple. It was owned by a foreigner, by a Jebusite. David purchased the property from him. It's important to note that the site of the temple in Jerusalem was purchased from a foreigner. It's important to note that David did not take that property by force. Final question, is there a lesson for us in David's declaration of verse 24? Well, that's when he says, I will not make a sacrifice that requires nothing of me. Well, God requires us to make personal sacrifice if we are to follow him. Not a sacrifice for our sin. Jesus only can take care of that. But the New Testament clearly tells us that we're to daily take up our cross and follow after him. So the call of Christ, the call of Christianity, is a call of submission and sacrifice. It's not a call to conquer. It's not a call to dominate others. I hope this study in 2 Samuel has been a blessing to you. I hope you're having a great day so far, and may God richly bless the rest of your day.